In today's video, let's recreate the iconic Frutiger Aero look from Windows Vista using Affinity. We'll kick off with making a copy of this wallpaper, and in the second half of the video, we'll create an app icon in the Aero look. To recreate this wallpaper, I'll start by adding a rectangle to cover the canvas. I'm going to use this rectangle to recreate the colors in the wallpaper. In order to do that, first I'm going to lower its opacity to 0 so that it becomes transparent. To recreate the colors, I'll use a gradient fill tool and set the gradient type to mesh from the toolbar. This will now create a grid with nodes to which I can assign colors to so that we get a mesh gradient. I'm going to select a node, and with the Alt or Option key pressed, I can move the mouse to get a temporary color picker. I'll use a color from the existing wallpaper near the node. As the opacity is set to 0, the mesh gradient I'm working on will not be visible, but it helps me to select a color from the layer beneath. Once I have assigned a color for each node, I can now set the opacity of the layer back to 100% to see the mesh gradient I just created. This looks pretty decent. And I now have a good base to work on. What I'm missing is the glowy lines on the left. I can try to recreate this in Affinity, but it might be easier to just use an image from the internet. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see a tutorial on creating these kind of lines. So here is an image I found and it looks quite similar. Now I need to blend this with the background I created. There are many ways to achieve this. I'll start by duplicating the rectangle I created for the background and then move this duplicate on top of the image. For the blend mode of this rectangle, I'll use the hard light blend mode. To improve the blend, I'll add a levels adjustment and move this as a child to the rectangle so that it only applies to the rectangle. Now by adjusting the black and white levels and focusing only on the glowy lines, I can fine-tune the blend. I think this looks about right. I still have this area on the left which stands out, but I can fix that by adding a transition mask to the image with the glowy lines. To create this mask, I'll add a rectangle on top of the image, go to the gradient tool, and then change the gradient type to linear in the toolbar. Now that I have a linear gradient, I can select the left node and set its opacity to 0. I now should have a gradient with no opacity on the left and full opacity on the right. This rectangle can now act as the transition mask. When I drag and drop this on the layer icon in the Layers panel, it will now be applied as the mask. Let me also enable the background we created initially to see the final result. That looks pretty good. When I compare this with the original, notice how the top right corner has a bright glow area. To add a similar glow to my background, I'll use an ellipse with a radial gradient fill. The radial gradient will be from white to black with white at the center. This way I can use the screen blend mode. The screen blend mode ignores black, which you can see when I change the blend mode of this ellipse to screen, and I end up with a white glow. Let me continue to fine-tune the shape and the gradient of the circle to match better with the original. To make the blend even better, I can add a live Gaussian blur filter to the ellipse, making the glow butter smooth. I also notice that I have a small blending issue here, so let me quickly fix that by adjusting the gradient mask of the glowy line image. Beautiful! I think the background looks pretty solid. Let me quickly select the layers I created and group them by using the Command or Ctrl G keyboard. I'll make sure to name them so I'll know the purpose of this group. Time to create the window logo icon. I'm going to add 2 circles. The bigger bottom circle will act as the border and the smaller circle on top will be the content, so that I can recreate the shiny effect. For the border circle, you can see that this goes from dark blue to a lighter cyan blue. So with the bottom circle selected, I can use the gradient tool with a linear gradient to achieve the same fill. Just as with the mesh gradient earlier, I can use the Alt or Option key trick to select the colors from our sample image. Now I'll do the same for the inner or content circle. Notice that the content is not a straightforward gradient. The top has a shine and the middle section is darker and then goes to a brighter color. To replicate this, I'll add a couple of additional nodes to the gradient and adjust their position to get a similar fill. Awesome! The background of the logo is ready. Now time for the curved window graphics. I'm not going to spend a lot of time to recreate this, but I will be using the pen and the node tool to get 4 similar shapes. And actually, I need just to do this for the bottom shapes and then duplicate them to the top shapes. It will definitely not be perfect, but you get the point. I can now select, group and move them over to the logo background we created. To finish the logo, I need to give them a color. As you can see, the fill of the window shapes have a radial gradient, so I'll use a gradient tool and apply a similar radial gradient to each of the window shapes as the original. Once I have the fill in place, I now need to apply 3D effects on these shapes, for which I will use the layer effects. With the group selected, I'll go to the Quick Effects panel and open the Effects dialog by clicking on the cog icon in one of the effects. The first effect I probably will need will be the bevel effect. I'll go with the inner bevel type and adjust the radius and set the highlight blend mode to multiply with a dark color. I'll turn it off for the time being and then move on to the 3D effect. After adjusting the parameters, I get something very close. Now, going back to the bevel effect, I think I'll switch to the outer bevel type and adjust the direction and the highlight color to get more of a shadow around the window shapes. To add even more shadows to the shapes, I can turn on the outer shadow effect and adjust the shadow parameters until I have a very similar shadow as the original. What I'm missing are the highlights around the border of the shapes. So let me turn on the inner glow, dim the color, and slightly adjust the radius to get that same feel as the original. For the finishing touch, I'll duplicate the shape group, turn off the effects for the duplicate, and then slightly adjust their size and position so they will not cover the border area from the group below. This way, I still have a nice fill that is not affected by the effects, and I get the border 3D effect from the group below. Awesome! I'm almost done with the logo. I just need a glow under it. For that, I'm going to add a circle below the logo and then make sure it has a gradient fill going from white to black, and just as showed before with the background, I'll set the blend mode of the circle to screen. A little bit of fine tuning of the gradient, and to make the glow around the edges stronger, I'll select the logo group and then apply a glow effect from the Quick Effects panel. Using the cog icon, I will open up the Effects dialog to fine-tune it even furthermore. Having multiple levels of glow makes usually a better glow effect. Finally, a Gaussian blur filter to the gradient circle in the screen blend mode to smoothen it even further. The logo with the effects and the glow is now done. Before adding the text, I'll add an HSL adjustment above the background group to slightly adjust the colors to my liking. Optionally, I can even go to the initial rectangle I created earlier with the mesh gradient and fine-tune the colors. Cherry on the top is the text using the Frutiger font face to get the Frutiger Aero look. Some minor tweaks with the font size and the font weight, and I'm pretty happy with the end result. Now let's quickly see how we can create Vista-style icon graphics. As you can see, it's mainly using gradients to get the shine look. So let me create a simple icon in the same style. I'll start by adding a rectangle which will contain the main letter of my icon. Just as with the Windows logo, I'm going to use another rounded rectangle which will contain the main fill. The outer rectangle will act as the border, For the inner rectangle, I'll add a linear gradient and have the gradient start from white for the shine and stop somewhere in the middle for the darker color. Now I can add the icon letter and also apply a gradient to this, similar to what we see in the PowerPoint icon. White at the top, a little bit grayish at the bottom, and the middle part slightly with the main icon color. If you look closely, there's a soft glow at the bottom of the text shape. As demonstrated earlier, the easiest way to create this is using an ellipse with a white to black gradient in screen blend mode. After adjusting the size and the gradient details, I can lower the opacity of this ellipse to decrease the effect so that it becomes quite gentle. Now I need the larger icon shape, for which I will just create a simple shape using the pen tool. From the Vector Studio, I can use the contour tool to round the edges, which gives the shape a softer look. The arrow icons have a dark border and a shiny content, and just as with the previous cases, I'll just duplicate the shape, adjust the size so that this inner shape will act as the content. The outer shape acts as the border for the glow and the shadow in the inner shape. As you guessed by now, I will use the gradient tool to add a linear gradient. Top will be white for the glow and then use the darker color at the bottom. Finally, for the glow inside, I will use the glow I created earlier for the letter and copy paste this so it can be used for the icon shape below the text box. To make the glow at the top a bit stronger and more dynamic, I'll duplicate this circle and move this to the top, resize, adjust, and I think we're done. As mentioned, the arrow look is just a collection of gradients which creates this look of shine and depth. Hope you found this video useful, and thanks again for tuning in. Hit the like and subscribe buttons before you leave, and see you in the next video.